The ayes are 232. The nays are 197. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
History in the United States as Donald Trump becomes the only president to be impeached twice. Hello there, I'm Mike Walters, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. There was more drama at the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday as the House of Representatives voted to hold President Trump accountable for inciting an insurrection just a week ago. Let's go straight to CGTN's Nathan King at the White House. And Nathan, an historic day for all the wrong reasons. Of course, you remember last week, a horrific scene. Tell us what happened today.
Yeah, what a difference a week makes in politics, huh? They say it's a long time, but this is just incredible. From essentially the U.S. President Donald Trump being on top of the Republican Party to essentially being a pariah, the only president in history to be impeached twice, pretty much within a year as well, and a one-term president at that. You know, it was never really in doubt. What we were really looking at was the number of Republicans who may break rank, and the fact that Liz Cheney, the number 3 in the House, and you know the name Cheney, don't you? I mean, the fact that she broke with the Republicans is quite incredible, and that gave room for another handful of Republicans, 10 in all, to break with it, to make the final tally 232 votes for impeachment, 197 against. They moved very, very swiftly. I mean, essentially, Nancy Pelosi's argument boiled down to this: if not this, then what? If not now, then when? And if not us, then who? And they really thought that essentially the president's comments here to that crowd and whipping them up on Wednesday just behind us on the ellipse in the South Lawn of the White House was just enough, essentially, to send that one article, basically incitement of insurrection. And now, you know, we don't exactly know what's happened, but the history books and all their headlines will say the same thing, that Donald Trump's first line, I think, even 100 years from now, is going to be the only president to be impeached twice, and a one-term president on that.
And Nathan, as you know, it's a deliberative body. To see them move with this kind of lightning speed is amazing. So what happens now? When will the article of impeachment make its way to the Senate, and when will the trial begin?
Well, in normal times, it would happen pretty soon. But of course, we are in a transition period, and the Senate is in recess essentially until January the 19th. That's the day before President-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are sworn in as president and vice president. So Mitch McConnell, the current leader of the Senate, Republicans, will lose his job then. And he hasn't ruled out voting for a conviction, but he's not going to call them back into emergency session. So don't expect a trial now. That means a trial for Donald Trump president could happen when he's not president. Now, why is this important? Well, it sets precedent because of what's happened. And it could be also, if they get a 2/3 majority to convict, they could hold other votes on whether to bar him from office for life as well. And of course, that could destroy his brand and also his pull with the Republican Party.
All right, thanks so much, Nathan. That is CGTN's Nathan King reporting from the White House.
Thank you.
There is a lot of ground to cover. Let's get right to our panel. Joseph Williams covers politics as a senior news editor at U.S. News and World Report. Rina Shah is a political strategist and commentator. She founded Republican Women for Biden. And Frank Sesno is a former CNN Washington bureau chief and director of George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs. He currently heads the university's strategic initiatives. Frank, why don't I start with you in this changing landscape? The story hit the New York Times last night, the Senate Majority Leader saying he's welcoming efforts to impeach Mitch McConnell. That seemed rather rare. And then you saw Liz Cheney saying she was going to vote. She did today. She put out this statement: the President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Even the House Minority Leader, who last week was going along with some of these people saying, oh, this is all rigged, today kind of struck a different tone, even though he still opposed impeachment. Let's listen to what Kevin McCarthy had to say.
For several hours last week, mob law tried to interfere with constitutional law. Some say the riots were caused by Antifa. There is absolutely no evidence of that. And conservatives should be the first to say so. The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump. Accept his share of responsibility, quell the brewing unrest, and ensure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term.
Frank, what a difference a week makes, huh? I mean, this is really remarkable, isn't it?
It is, but what McCarthy didn't say, and what very few Republicans are saying, is that the president laid the groundwork for this, that the president persisted in months of mischaracterization, outright lies about the election being stolen, that the president refused to then and even now acknowledge that there was a legitimate election that took place. And so what they're left with doing is having to pick up the wreckage, the pieces, after the riot. So I think it's extraordinary, and it's important that this vote today, the impeachment vote, had Republican votes. It was not just a single party, the Democrats voting as they did last time with no Republican help, but they did not have the kind of mass rallying around this that would have sent an even stronger signal. There's a lot that's going to only start now in terms of what's going to happen in the Senate, in terms of how the country's going to digest it. Really, the biggest challenge in many ways, or certainly the most immediate, is to the Republican Party itself. What do they stand for? How much of Trumpism will they continue to embrace?
So, Rina, why don't I talk to you a little bit about that, because obviously that's a part of the Republican Party you're not fond of. McCarthy also said that Trump accepts some responsibility for the riot last week, but he spoke yesterday in Texas, and we certainly didn't hear that. He was still quite defiant. Let's listen.
So if you read my speech, and many people have done it, and I've seen it both in the papers and in the media, on television, it's been analyzed, and people thought that what I said was totally appropriate. And if you look at what other people have said, politicians at a high level, about the riots during the summer, the horrible riots in Portland and Seattle and various other places, that was a real problem, what they said. But they've analyzed my speech and my words and my final paragraph, my final sentence, and everybody to the T thought it was totally appropriate.
Well, let's analyze the last week. He's lost his Twitter account. Banks and businesses are turning their back on him. They think he's radioactive. He lost a PGA tournament. Just how damaged is Trump and the Trump brand?
Well, I'd like to start by saying there's a number that's going to haunt the Republican Party, but more importantly, Donald Trump, the rest of his life, and it'll be the number 232, because that was the number of votes by which he was impeached for the second time tonight. And I think that number also, what it signifies was one thing he was very proud of in the beginning, his Electoral College win. That was back in 2016. But what we know in 2020, that number also fell, 232. So 232 will be a number that haunts this man for the rest of his life, and it very well should. He has incited violence in a way that is unconscionable for those of us who've been inside Washington for years. And I tell you, what this has done by sending shockwaves through the country, this will wake up the Republican Party. The Republican Party needs a shock. And I think, though, it's going to take some time. It's going to get them getting to the ballot box. It's going to be electoral losses, which teach them a lesson. Because these 10 Republicans who went over to the other side, went with Democrats tonight to impeach him a second time, they put country over party, and they should be rewarded. But others will face the wrath, I believe, of not just voters, but of big money as well. The Republican Accountability Project, which is from Defending Democracy Together, has pledged something like $50 million to protect those Republicans who would vote to impeach tonight. We saw that didn't do much good. Only 10 defected, so to speak. And I'm proud to call one of those 10 my friends. Representative Jamie Herrera Butler of Washington State is a friend of mine, and I'm proud of her for doing the right thing tonight. There are others that are also friends of mine that I will be having conversations with, and I will be withdrawing support from, because they deserve to feel the weight of this decision that they made to put their own power to self-preserve when the country is on the line, when the democracy is on the line. So I look forward to these hard conversations in the Republican Party. There's going to be a reckoning, no doubt. And voters will give it to them, corporations we already know, and individual donors. But it's very, very disappointing tonight, although it's good news that only 2 women were part of this crop of 10 Republicans, again, who chose to put country over party. I've done a lot with Republican women over the years, and what this told me tonight is that not everybody had the courage of Jamie Herrera Butler or Lynn Cheney.
Yeah.
And sorry, Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
So this is a moment where we have to say, what was their calculation? They say they feared for their family's safety. They feared being murdered. And that tells you everything you need to know about the state of our politics right now. We are in such an awful place. Awful.
Yeah,
beyond awful.
to your point, Joseph, let's talk a little bit about that because we saw something in the Capitol today. We saw lawmakers there, but we saw something else. We saw these guardsmen. We have video of them sleeping in the Capitol today. The threat is real. It's still there. It's not just here in the U.S. Capitol. It's in capitals all across the country. Talk to us about this dangerous time we're living in.
Well, this is a scene that we've not seen since the War of 1812. Troops bivouacked in the U.S. Capitol. On my way to the studio here, I had to go along 12th Street, not 12th Street, beg your pardon, L Street, end to end. Every corner there's a police officer. Every corner that doesn't have a police officer, there's a National Guard person. So it's crazy that we're living through this bit of history, but one could argue that this has been years in the making, that we've had Donald Trump on our plates for a long, long time. We've heard what he said. We've seen what he's done. And it's not been a big surprise to me that this is that this is the coda of his presidency. We've lived with a lot of the division, a lot of the norm busting, and they're norms for a reason. And one of the things that Republican Party is going to have to reckon with, that I think they still won't reckon with, even when they lose at the electoral at the ballot box like they did this past November, they're going to have to decide what they stand for as a party. It's not just country over party. They also have to decide what country they want to represent, because the country that they're representing right now is partially. It's not difficult to argue that the country they represent showed up on Monday, or showed up on Wednesday of last week and stormed the Capitol. That many of them, if they weren't necessarily diehard Trump fans, they certainly did ally with the Republican Party more than they did with the Democrats. So it's going to be a reckoning. It probably will take a long time, but I think that certainly the vote in the House and the questionable vote in the Senate indicates that there's going to be a long way to go, and that the weight of this lesson still hasn't been fully grasped by the party, particularly in light of the fact that 5 people died in the melee.
Right. Well, Joseph, you passed all of that today. Of course, I saw some of that as well coming into work today. These lawmakers saw that as they made their way to the Capitol today to give their speeches. That's why we saw a lot of fiery speeches. Let's listen to a little bit from Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern.
Trump then told this mob to walk down to the Capitol. The signal was unmistakable. These thugs should stage a coup so Donald Trump can hang on to power. The people's will be damned. This beacon of democracy became the site of a vicious attack. This was not a protest. This was an insurrection. This was a well-organized attack on our country that was incited by Donald Trump.
So talk to us about this vote, because it wasn't an ag bill or a tax cut. This was personal for these lawmakers. They were there last week. They were threatened.
They were there. They were threatened. They were hiding under desks. There were people hunting at least 2 members of the Congress down, Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Mike Pence. And on Twitter this morning, Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, was talking about how she feared for her very life because she's been so vilified by the president. She feared that even if she was hiding with Republican lawmakers, that one of them would have dimed her out. One of them would have leaked to the crowd where she was, and that would have been lights out. So it's a very, very dangerous moment, and it still surprises me that there were so many people that stood by the president, even after having their very lives threatened, including Mike Pence. They were targets. And to walk past the damage that's still in the Capitol, to remember the echoes of screams and yells and people storming the People's House, to me, it's very surprising and a little disturbing that that was not the wake-up call, that was not the come to Jesus moment that so many other Republicans needed to vote for conviction. They're still very much mindful of the base that Trump controls. He still has a very large footprint in the party. He will for a long time. And I think that that's something that really has not sunk in quite yet.
I want to invite Jadan Horyn into the conversation. He's a writer and conservative commentator. Jadan, one of the arguments we heard today is a similar argument from the last impeachment go-round, which is the Democrats have had it out for Trump from the very beginning. Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio making the case today.
19 minutes, 4 years ago on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2017, 19 minutes into President Trump's administration, at 12:19 p.m., the Washington Post headline was, "Campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." And now, with just 1 week left, they're still trying.
And that was a speech aimed at an audience of one, Donald Trump, but also his base, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think to bring some facts to the American people, you know, we know from day one when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump that Democrats would do absolutely anything in their power to undo the election. But that's immaterial now. What has happened is that people who say they support Donald Trump attacked the Capitol when they were certifying the next president of the United States, who was not Donald Trump. And, you know, when we spoke about it on the program last week, you know, we have to understand how we got where we are and where we need to go from here. And I think there is a grave miscalculation that Democrats are doing in believing they need to send some kind of message of impeaching and hopefully convicting and barring Trump from future federal office, but not understanding that turning him into a martyr and then going after his supporters is the very thing that Hillary Clinton did and that conservatives and Trump supporters were afraid of from 4 years ago. And so I think there needs to be both a moral but a political and a civic calculation that occurs. And again, like I said last week, it seems like the only person here who really has an idea that we need to unify the nation is Joe Biden. And as our next president, I sincerely hope that rather than look backwards in hopes of doing punitive damage to Republicans and those that many on the left and the media believe supported Trump, that instead we look to build a national fabric for the future. Because creating a martyr out of someone only makes them a folk hero to a cause. And if we all truly believe that the excesses of the Trump era ought not to continue, then we should not incentivize people to do that. The tech companies banning the president creates a folk hero out of him and sets incredibly dangerous precedents, whether we agree or disagree, whether we believe there's culpability or we don't agree that there's culpability. Those type of actions, while in short term appear to appease people who are desiring justice, I think in the long term do a really, really damaging and dangerous effect on our constitutional republic.
So Rina, I wanted to give you a chance to take a swipe at that. Are these individuals in the House turning Donald Trump into a martyr?
I don't know what they're doing. I think they're self-preserving. I think they want to be done with him, but they're really worried about his base. So they're not any longer, playing for that audience of one. This is about his supporters, those he sort of awakened and brought into the party, some of them, and got to vote for him in massive numbers back in 2016 and stuck with him through 4 years of actions that were not always conservative. Yes, he did do many policy-related things that were considered good by Republicans. Obviously, the behavior was problematic for a great many conservatives. Evangelicals made a calculation that he's a flawed man, and that they could take that as long as they could get what they wanted. And that was the conservative judges. So that was important to them. But this bit about big tech and what they've done to Donald Trump, that's the free markets at work. I mean, that is just the most nonsensical argument to me that, Twitter shouldn't have done what they did and everybody else followed. That's the free markets, my friend. That's what we conservatives have always talked about. They are free to censor him. They are a private corporation and they can do that because everybody everybody agrees to their terms and conditions when they sign up for an account, much like real Donald Trump did at real Donald Trump. Right. So that's the one bit I have with Trump is that, look, the party wants to be done with you, move on. He'll move on. He'll do what he wants to do as a private citizen. The part that scares me most is what he could be selling to the highest bidder out there, what American secrets that he could be out there selling, because we know he's a guy who really cares about one thing, and that's enriching himself. It was never about the betterment of average folks, average Americans. He hijacked the Republican Party for convenience, and now what we have is complete anarchy within the party. And one big bit here, one very important point to note, I realize a fellow panelist said, you know, the Congress basically got a wake-up call. The Republicans in Congress got a wake-up call from election 2020. I don't think they did. Sure, they don't have the Senate, but the reality is that they picked up seats in the House. So it would have behooved national Republicans to keep their mouths shut, just be excited that they picked up seats in the House of Representatives, and they were able to flip some seats too. And so therefore, if keeping their mouths shut, they could have moved forward into this year, but instead they chose to take the lies and be fooled by Donald Trump and do this whole stop this deal business and say we don't want to certify the Electoral College vote. If they hadn't done any of this, it would have been far better for the future of the party.
Well, Joseph, let me ask you this question, because it seemed like, for those of us watching today, it seemed like there were two messages: unity versus accountability. Let's listen to Congressman Jerry Connolly of Virginia.
The American people are asking, is there any depravity too low? Is there any outrage too far? Is there any blood and violence too much to turn hearts and minds in this body? Instead of the usual justification, rationalization, and enabling and false equivalence we have to hear. This is a moment of truth, my friends. Are you on the side of chaos and the mob, or on the side of constitutional democracy and our freedom?
So, Joseph, let's talk about these arguments today, because the Republicans, last week, they certainly weren't saying this, but they were saying, let's heal and unity, whereas the Democrats were saying, look, there needs to be accountability. People died here. What about these messages?
Well, they're separate and distinct, and it's hard to find where they overlap because they hardly do at all. I mean, the first step towards healing, and you can look no further than South Africa, is reconciliation and accountability, finding out what exactly happened and then punishing or at least calling people to account for what those actions were. Here again, we're hearing people talk about healing, and it always seems to happen when Republicans get into trouble. It's talking about healing and reconciliation, but not when the shoe is on the other foot. So I think trying to move past this and saying that there's nothing to see here really does a great disservice to those people who died, and not even the people who died, but we are talking about some dozen injuries among police officers who were beaten by a mob that was in support of the president. And in terms of free speech, I mean, yes, the president has a right to say what he wants to, but as a journalist, I have to remind our panelists that this is kind of like yelling fire in a crowded theater. That's not, you can't do that. That's where the limit of free speech ends. And to a lot of observers, and not just a few, many observers said that this was tantamount to that. What the president did to a mob that was already excited and excitable and planning violent acts online. Violent acts online were planned, and the president did nothing to stop it. In fact, he encouraged the crowd. Now, he doesn't have to say, hey, go take the White House or go take Capitol Hill and kill somebody. No, that doesn't have to happen. What does have to happen is plans made online and him encouraging those people who made those plans to go take action at his direction.
Jadan, Congresswoman Debbie Lesko basically said, what's the point of this? Let's listen to what she said.
I've heard my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say they have to impeach the president because he is too dangerous to stay in power. Yet they know that it is impossible for the Senate to remove him before his term expires. So what is the point?
Do you agree with her argument?
Absolutely. I mean, Mitch McConnell came out and said as much. Yeah, I have to say, I think, you know, a lot of this is political grandstanding at its absolute most disgusting worst. You know, the Republicans that were objecting to the certification of electors were following the storied Democratic strategy of doing the same. And they were also playing to their base, as your other panelists said, hoping to inherit the Trump electorate. Democrats played with fire when they first sought to impeach President Trump because they played to their base who spent the last 6 months, and especially over the summer, as Congresswoman Boebert so eloquently said when she quoted numerous members of Congress inciting people to violence when there was crowds outside the White House, that at one point the Secret Service was worried they would need to fire on them, and ultimately we know that they did, that this is where we are with the rhetoric of both parties.
So
there is no one side is responsible.
They've got to dial it down. Let me bring Frank into the conversation, because historian Arthur Schlesinger said after Richard Nixon's resignation that Watergate was potentially the best thing to happen to the presidency in a long time, because of course it led to sweeping reforms. But he said that corruption appears to visit the White House every 50 years. He warned that around the year 2023, the American people will be well advised to go on the alert and start nailing down everything in sight. Of course, he missed by a couple of years, but are we likely to see major changes as a result of what happened last week?
Well, we'll see. I think so. I hope so. There are already a number of activities taking place involving a lot of money, a lot of people that are going to be looking very profoundly at the state of American democracy, what needs to take place from here. It is inevitable that the Republican Party, and we've talked about this, is going to have a very significant come-to-Jesus moment here over what of Trumpism, if any of Trumpism, stays and prevails in the party. Voters across the country, as they listen to candidates, are going to be, asking themselves, with this imagery in place, what the future holds and what the direction will be. I think what we don't know and what we haven't spoken about, it was mentioned earlier, is how much revolves around what Joe Biden does when he comes in. What kind of president will he be? Will he rise to the moment? It's almost as if the president-elect is coming in after a war, and a war you have lost. And there needs to be rebuilding and reconstruction and reconciliation. But people also have to come to terms with what took place. And that's where I'm not sure we're there yet. People need to come to terms with how close we came to the edge and where responsibility really falls. Just one last point here. It's going to be interesting, fascinating to see the Senate figure out how it's going to conduct its trial. But what's going to happen between now and the 19th, when the Senate returns, is an enormous amount of additional evidence as to how deep and how pervasive the plot really was, who it involved, whether members of Congress may have been in some way implicated. We're going to be learning a lot more, and that's going to be a big driver to your question about how fundamental the change is, because I think people are going to be horrified by what they learn and how deep and how pervasive this is, and how much violence could have and may still take place.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating time, and we'll be watching it. Frank, thanks so much for your analysis, and to all our panelists, we certainly appreciate it. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Mulder in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us.